Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dry, shimmering heat of ancient Egypt. You're standing barefoot in the dust, and the Nile is just over there, gleaming like a ribbon of green life, cutting through a land of gold and stone. Somewhere behind you, palm fronds whisper, though mostly it's cicadas, and the lazy flap of ibis wings. But the air feels heavier tonight, because in this story, you're stepping straight into the sandals of someone who's about to carry the weight of a kingdom before he's even old enough to shave. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing the little constellation of where and when we all are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is around 1332 BCE, and you're a boy, 9 years old, give or take. Your name is Tutankhamun, not yet Tutankhamun. You've been raised inside the painted walls of palaces and the strict gaze of tutors who keep drilling hieroglyphs into your mind, even when your hand cramps holding the reed pen. You don't understand everything yet, but you understand this. Egypt is restless. The old king, Akhenaten, your probable father, has left the land in chaos. He closed temples, angered priests, and declared the sun disk attend the only god worth worshipping. Imagine if tomorrow someone unplugged every Wi-Fi router in the world and told you there was only one channel left to watch forever. People would riot. And yes, someone would definitely try to invent underground Wi-Fi. That's basically Egypt right now. You shuffle through gilded halls in Thebes, barefoot on cool alabaster floors, attendants trailing behind with fans of ostrich feathers. You are the boy the gods chose, or so everyone insists. Though, honestly, you feel like a pawn being shoved around a very ancient board game. Grown men with shaved heads and kohl-rimmed eyes kneel before you, but you notice their sideways glances, their measured words. Even at 9, you can tell they're not bowing to you so much as to the throne behind you. Historians still argue whether you even understood the scale of it all. Were you a child, playing with ivory toys while priests plotted? Or a sharp-eyed little king who realized that every smile around you was also a mask? The truth probably floats somewhere between. The coronation itself dazzles. Gold glints from every surface. Incense coils in the air like ghostly ribbons, and your small hands clutch the crook and flail, symbols of kingship that feel way too heavy. You stand on the dais as chants echo, priests praising you as the living Horus. You can smell the resin burning, the wax melting down the sides of tall lamps, the faint tang of copper from ceremonial weapons. The entire hall vibrates with drums, sistrums, and that eerie chanting that seems to shake your ribs from the inside out. And then there's the crown. It's almost comical. 2 heavy pieces combined into one. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, stuck together like an ancient prototype of a snapback hat. Except this thing weighs as much as a bowling ball, and it's slowly denting your skull. You try not to wobble, but your neck aches. Still, attendants murmur blessings in your ear, reminding you to keep your chin lifted. Congratulations, you are now Pharaoh. Try not to fall over. Mainstream fact time. Tutankhamun really was only about 9 years old when he became king. Imagine today's 9-year-olds ruling a country. Half of them would legislate permanent recess. The other half would pass decrees about unlimited chicken nuggets. Egypt, however, didn't get that lucky. What it got was a boy whose body was already fragile. He walked with a limp, suffered from congenital issues, and would carry the burdens of both crown and disease. But here's a quirky tidbit. In some inscriptions, you can see little scenes of young Tut riding in a chariot or playing with pets, as if the palace wanted everyone to know. Look, he's totally fine. He's strong. Don't worry. It's ancient PR. They even staged images of him smiting enemies. Though, in real life, he probably couldn't run across the courtyard without stopping to catch his breath. Still, Egypt needs a king, and you are it. And as you sit there on the throne, your feet not even reaching the carved lions at its base, you feel the first tremors of destiny press into your chest. You don't yet know that in just a decade, you'll be gone, leaving behind one of the world's greatest mysteries, a skull fracture that no one can fully explain. Accident? Illness? Assassination? Historians still argue whether you were struck down or simply fell victim to your own failing body. For now, though, you're just a boy blinking in the incense haze, your head pounding under the weight of the double crown, as a chorus of voices hails you as Pharaoh, son of Ra, lord of the two lands. Egypt roars approval, though behind those cheers lurks the low hum of ambition, scheming, and whispers that will follow you into the grave. And so you rise, a boy king in a world far too dangerous for children. The incense smoke hasn't even cleared from your coronation when the whispers start. You're sitting on a carved stool, nibbling at a date sticky with honey, when two officials walk by, their voices pitched low, but not low enough. They think you don't hear, but of course you do. You always do. The palace is a labyrinth of voices, stone corridors echoing with footsteps, gossip slinking between pillars, conversations dissolving into murmurs. The second you appear, you're 9 years old, yet already you know how to tilt your head just enough to catch what people really mean when they bow. In the open courtyards, courtiers parade in dazzling linen, their collars stiff with beads, their eyes smeared with black coal. They bow with dramatic flair, but once they turn, you hear the scratching of sandals, the click of amulets, and the murmured, "The boy will not last long." The walls themselves seem to breathe it, whispers rising like desert winds. Here's the thing, a palace isn't only about gold and music. It's also about politics. You may rule in name, but you're surrounded by adults who see you as a piece on their gaming board. There's I, your vizier, a seasoned old man whose smooth smile hides something sharper. There's Horemheb, commander of the army, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, eyes like a hawk's. Between them, it feels like two jackals eyeing a young calf. Historians still argue whether these men were protectors or predators. Did they genuinely guide a fragile boy king? Or did they plant themselves in the throne's shadow, waiting for their moment? The debate still flickers in academic circles. But in this moment, inside the palace, it's not a debate. It's your reality. Let's take a step deeper into these halls. You wander barefoot across polished limestone, walls painted with bright scenes, lotus flowers, Nile reeds, gods towering with animal heads. But in the corners of your hearing, you pick up fragments. Restore Amun. Generals growing restless. The boy too frail. The echoes never stop. Even when musicians pluck harps and flutes at night. Even when dancers with scented hair twirl in torchlight. The undertone is always there. Mainstream fact. After Akhenaten's radical push for Aten worship, Egypt was desperate to return to traditional gods, especially Amun. The priests wanted stability, the people wanted the old ways, and Tutankhaten, soon to be Tutankhamun, was their puppet path back. Palace whispers weren't just idle gossip. They were the shaping of policy in real time. And here's a quirky tidbit. Apparently, palace officials sometimes trained cats to roam corridors, almost like furry spies. Cats were sacred, yes, but also handy little eavesdroppers. Imagine being a 9-year-old king, nervously stroking a purring cat, half wondering if it's also reporting your secrets back to the priests. Ancient intelligence agency, whiskers included. In the evenings, you recline on cushions, the scent of lotus oil heavy in the air. Ankhesenamun, your half-sister and eventual wife, sometimes sits beside you, both of you children in a world of schemers. She's quiet, her eyes flicking toward the guards at the door, the vizier standing too close. She whispers to you in the dark, "Trust no one, not even me." That's not the kind of bedtime story you want at age 10. The palace feels alive. Torches sputtering, sandals shuffling, parchment scratching in back rooms. Advisors argue behind closed doors, their tones urgent. You sense that decisions are being made without you, treaties signed, enemies named. The throne room is your stage, but the script is written elsewhere. And you start to notice small things. A goblet refilled a little too quickly, as if someone wants to keep your mind foggy. A servant bowing too low, then glancing at A before leaving the room. Horemheb clapping your shoulder too firmly, smiling in a way that feels more like a warning than affection. You're not paranoid. You're observant. Even a child can tell when every adult around him is waiting for him to trip. Historians still argue whether you are truly aware of these dynamics. Some believe you are too young, too ill to notice. Others suggest you were sharp, even stubborn, aware enough to start asserting yourself later, despite the palace's grip. Tonight, lying under embroidered sheets, staring at a ceiling painted with stars, you wonder if your life will be lived or if it's already being written for you. And the whispers don't stop. They curl like smoke through every room, wrapping around you, filling your ears, seeping into your dreams. Even when you close your eyes, you hear them. The boy king, too weak, too short a reign. You are Pharaoh, yes, but you are also prey. Morning in Thebes begins with sound. You wake not to an alarm clock, but to the rumble of oxen carts outside palace walls, the distant calls of merchants setting up stalls, and the swish of brooms as servants sweep sand from courtyards that will be coated again in an hour. You're still a boy, but when your eyelids crack open, an attendant is already waiting to wash your face with cool water poured from a copper jug. You shiver as the liquid trickles down, smelling faintly of lotus petals. The Palace of Thebes is less of a single building and more of a sprawl, a collection of halls, gardens, and courtyards designed to make you feel like a god while simultaneously reminding you that everyone else is watching. The floors shine with alabaster, smooth and cool on bare feet. Painted walls show reeds, hunting scenes, and gods towering above humans, like constant reminders that even Pharaoh is small compared to the divine. Your daily life is a mixture of ceremony and monotony. After washing, attendants help you into fine linen, pleated, starched, and annoyingly itchy. The collars are heavy with beads, gold glints from every edge. Somewhere in the palace kitchens, bread is baking, and the yeasty smell floats into your chamber, mixing with incense burned to purify your morning. Breakfast isn't cereal, it's figs, dates, honeyed bread, and perhaps a roasted quail if the kitchen is feeling fancy. But before you can eat, there's ritual, always ritual. You walk across the courtyard where priests wait, their bald heads gleaming in the sunlight. They guide you to a small shrine set inside the palace itself. Even though you're yawning, they expect you to raise your hands in prayer, recite words you barely remember, and sprinkle offerings of milk and bread for the gods. The irony isn't lost on you. Gods don't eat bread, but you definitely could. Historians still argue whether young Tutankhamun truly led these ceremonies, or if priests performed most duties in his name. In theory, Pharaoh was the living Horus, the bridge between people and gods. In practice, a kid with clubfoot and a limp probably didn't last long in day-long rituals without help. But in paintings and inscriptions, the story is clear. Pharaoh is always shown leading, never faltering. And here's a quirky tidbit. Palace life wasn't all solemn worship. Archaeologists have found toys, little ivory animals, carved boards for games like senet, even miniature furniture. Imagine you, the great Pharaoh of Egypt, sneaking away from the throne to play a board game, basically equivalent to ancient Candyland. That's your secret downtime. Except, of course, your tutors always find you. Ah, the tutors. After breakfast, you're shepherded into lessons. You sit cross-legged on woven mats, while scribes unfurl papyrus, their reed pens scratching symbols you must learn by repetition. Hieroglyphs aren't just pictures, they're entire worlds of meaning. A duck isn't just a duck. Depending on context, it can mean sun, egg, or irritated ruler who hates writing class. Your wrist cramps, ink splatters your linen, and your tutor sighs the sigh of every teacher who's ever taught a distracted child. Daily life isn't all learning, though. By midday, you're escorted to gardens for fresh air. These aren't ordinary backyards. They're carefully designed oases with fish ponds, papyrus reeds, and rows of sycamore trees that provide cool shade. Perfume lingers in the air from garlands of flowers. You walk with a slight limp, leaning on a cane carved from ebony. but attendants discreetly look away, pretending not to notice. Egypt can worship a frail boy as a god, but still must hide his human fragility. By afternoon, the palace becomes busy. Courtiers stream in, scribes with petitions, military officials with reports, priests with offerings. They bow, speak in long, winding phrases, and expect you to nod gravely even when you're fighting the urge to nap. Sometimes you're allowed to ride in a ceremonial chariot through Thebes. The wheels clatter, horses snort, crowds cheer, but the ride is short. Too much strain, and your body reminds you painfully that you're not a warrior pharaoh like the ones painted on temple walls. Mainstream fact: Thebes at this time was not only a political hub, but also a religious center. The great temple of Karnak dominated the skyline, priests of Amun wielding enormous influence. For a boy king, living daily life in Thebes meant existing in a city where the divine and political overlapped so completely that every meal, every walk, every breath was framed as sacred duty. In the evenings, when the sun slips low and paints the Nile in copper, the palace comes alive with softer sounds: harps, flutes, voices singing hymns. Torches flicker, shadows stretch across painted walls. You sit on a cushioned throne while dancers twirl, their hair braided with fresh flowers, perfume heavy in the air. You taste sweet wine diluted with water, nibble roasted duck, and try to look interested, while two generals argue over who gets more troops for border patrol. Yet, even in these hours of feasting, whispers persist. You notice the sideways glances, the way priests seem to linger near your vizier. You're young, yes, but not oblivious. Everyone has their own rhythm in this palace, their own hidden agenda. You realize your daily life is more than rituals and lessons. It's a stage where everyone else is rehearsing their moves for when the boy king falters. Historians still argue whether you enjoyed palace life or felt trapped by it. Was it golden splendor to you, or a cage lined with lotus petals? Tonight, lying on a bed with the carved lion legs, head resting against linen-stuffed cushions, you stare at ceilings painted with stars and think, I am Pharaoh, and yet, tomorrow, I'll still have to practice hieroglyphs. Some divine duties never end. The day doesn't belong to you. That's the first thing you realize as you're tugged from sleep by the gentle tap of an attendant and the smell of incense already curling through the doorway. Even before your eyes adjust to the dawn light filtering through reed blinds, you know what's waiting. Duty. Not the kind of duty where you have to clean your room or memorize your math tables. No, this is the kind where an entire kingdom insists you're literally the hinge between gods and men. No pressure, right? The palace hums with anticipation. Priests are already awake, their heads shaved, their linen spotless, their voices hoarse from rehearsing hymns since before sunrise. Servants bustle with trays of bread, fruit, and jars of beer, not because you'll eat much of it, but because offerings must be ready for the gods. You're expected to preside, to nod, to wave, to lift your small, bony hands in gestures that signal cosmic order is, in fact, holding steady. Mainstream fact: Pharaoh wasn't just a political figure, he was seen as divine. In Egyptian belief, Pharaoh embodied Horus in life and Osiris in death, Every morning ritual, every temple procession, every carefully measured offering was more than pomp. It was the machinery of the universe. If Pharaoh failed, crops might wither, floods might falter, and the gods might abandon Egypt. That's a lot of weight to put on a 9-year-old's shoulders. The schedule is rigid. After a hurried wash and breakfast, you're escorted into temple courtyards, still cool from night air. The stones under your feet hold the memory of yesterday's sun, a warmth that creeps into your bones. Musicians strike up haunting notes on sistrums and flutes. The chant begins. Deep voices of priests bouncing off high walls, painted with gods larger than life. Smoke rises, thick and sticky in your throat. You cough once, but an attendant quickly hushes you. Divine rituals don't pause for human weakness. And here comes the tricky part. You're expected to perform the opening of the mouth ceremony on statues of gods, a symbolic act that feeds them, allowing them to breathe and accept offerings. The ritual dagger, heavy in your child's hand, glints with sunlight. You try not to drop it as priests guide your motions like puppet masters. You touch it to the lips of stone Amun, pretending that the god now eats and speaks. Of course, you're starving, but you'll have to wait. Gods eat first. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun personally carried out these duties, or if high priests handled most of them while he appeared in symbolic moments. Artwork suggests he was front and center, but inscriptions were as much propaganda as reality. Perhaps he stood stiffly while adults moved his arms, like a doll held upright in front of thousands. The duties don't stop at temples. Every decision in Egypt has a divine flavor. Need to raise taxes? Blame the god's will. Need to build a canal? Announce it as a sacred command. You're Pharaoh, so you're expected to declare these things with solemn authority. In truth, you stumble over words, your voice cracking at the wrong moments. But the scribes dutifully record them as if thunder boomed when you spoke. Imagine being a middle schooler whose every squeaky sentence is carved in stone. Awkward forever. Quirky tidbit. Priests sometimes used scented wax cones that melted on their heads during rituals, releasing perfumes slowly like ancient air fresheners. Picture yourself sweating under the sun, a cone of perfumed fat perched on your wig, dripping down your neck, while everyone pretends this is the height of sacred elegance. You smell like frankincense, yes, but also like roasted lamb after a while. After rituals, more duties. You sit in audiences while scribes unroll papyri covered in disputes about land, grain, or who stole whose goats. You nod gravely, even if half the words slide past you like river reeds in the current. I, the vizier, often speaks in your name, his calm voice covering your silence. You wonder, is this my decision or his? Do I rule, or do I just sit on the cushion while others pull strings? Still, some moments strike awe. Imagine standing at Karnak Temple, its towering columns like a stone forest stretching into the sky, sunlight filtering down in golden shafts. You lift your arms in offering, and for one heartbeat, the crowd hushes, the music pauses, and you feel it. That rush of power, that electric sense that maybe, just maybe, the gods really are listening to you. Evening duties are gentler, hymns at sunset, Small offerings at private shrines, prayers whispered under painted ceilings as the stars flicker to life outside. Yet even in the quiet, you feel the weight. Every gesture is rehearsed, every word scrutinized. The gods expect perfection, but so do the priests, the generals, and the entire kingdom. You're a child trapped in divine choreography, where missing a step feels like endangering the cosmos. Historians still argue whether this divine role strengthened Tutankhamun's fragile body or exhausted him into decline. Was ritual a stabilizing anchor, or a grinding weight that eroded his health faster? Either way, the divine duties never eased. Night falls, and you crawl into bed, incense still clinging to your hair, your dreams crowded with towering gods who stare at you silently, waiting, always waiting. The palace changes when Ankhesenamun is placed at your side. One day, she's simply your half-sister, another child darting down painted corridors, her laughter echoing between papyrus-lined courtyards. The next, she is your queen, her name inked beside yours on official decrees, her image carved beside yours on temple walls. Marriage in this world is never about love, not in the way a modern ear might hope. It's about power, legacy, and making Egypt look stable after years of chaos. You're still barely a teenager when the wedding is arranged. Ankhesenamun is older than you, by a few years at least, and far sharper in palace politics. She has lived through the storm of your father Akhenaten's reign, seen the temples close, the priests grow restless, and the gods themselves seemingly banished from their shrines. She knows what it means to survive court life. You, meanwhile, are still half distracted by games of Senate and the itch of new sandals. But duty calls, and duty says you will be husband and wife. Mainstream fact. Tutankhamun married Ankhesenamun, his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. Royal incest wasn't scandalous in Egypt. It was expected, a way to keep the divine bloodline pure. What shocks a modern reader was standard royal strategy in the ancient world. The wedding itself is a spectacle. Imagine a courtyard filled with garlands of lotus and papyrus, musicians strumming harps, dancers weaving through the air with scented hair, priests chant blessings, incense coils skyward, and the two of you stand side by side in gleaming linen. The Nile glimmers in the distance, as if even the river pauses to witness. Ankhesenamun's eyes are lined with heavy kohl, her lips painted with crushed carmine, her headdress glittering with gold and faience. You, slightly shorter and still thin from illness, struggle to keep the ceremonial crown from sliding sideways on your head. Whispers rise around you again. To the priests, this marriage is reassurance. The royal line continues. The god's will is honored. To the generals, it's stability. The boy king now has a queen to anchor him, meaning less chance of civil fracture. But beneath the official joy is a current of unease. Everyone knows your body's fragile, that producing heirs may not come easily. Historians still argue whether Ankhesenamun truly loved you or simply endured you as part of her role. Was she a partner who shared your burden, or a survivor calculating her next move in a palace of knives? In surviving letters and fragments, her voice flickers between tenderness and desperation. But the gaps leave scholars debating endlessly. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some tomb art shows you and Ankhesenamun hunting together, sharing banquets, even enjoying moments of play. These weren't casual doodles, they were propaganda. But maybe, in rare moments when the torches burned low and attendants slipped away, the two of you really did share laughter. Maybe you teased her about her elaborate wigs, or she teased you about always leaning too heavily on your cane. Even kings and queens can snicker like teenagers. Married life, though, is still palace life. Together, you attend rituals, bow before statues, sit side by side on golden thrones while scribes carve your names into eternity. Together, you endure feasts where generals argue across trays of roast goose. And together, you exchange polite smiles when eye leans in too close, or when Horemheb's booming voice rattles the wine jars. There's comfort in numbers. Even two children playing at being rulers can find strength when standing shoulder to shoulder. But the pressure grows. Behind closed doors, physicians whisper about fertility, about heirs. The kingdom needs an heir. Ankhesenamun knows it, the priests know it, and you know it. Every glance toward her stomach is a reminder that Egypt's future sits in her body, not yours. At night, when the palace is quiet, she may turn to you and whisper fears you barely understand. The two of you are children pressed into roles far larger than your bodies can bear. Thebes itself hums with celebration after the marriage. Markets buzz, bakers shape loaves stamped with your joined names. Musicians play louder, dancers whirl longer. The city needs hope, and your union is painted as the dawn of a new age. Yet as you ride through the streets, your wife's hand resting in yours, you feel the way the crowd cheers, not for you, but for the idea of you. They cheer stability, continuity, reassurance. They cheer symbols carved into walls, not the trembling boy and the wary young woman seated on the chariot. Historians still argue whether Ankhesenamun held true political power during your reign. Some believe she was merely ceremonial. Others suspect she wielded influence behind the scenes, especially as your health declined. What's clear is that her survival depended on this marriage, just as yours did. And so, by firelight, you lie in adjoining chambers, separated by curtains, yet joined by destiny. The air smells of myrrh and wine, the ceiling painted with golden stars. You listen to the quiet hush of Ankhesenamun's breathing nearby, and wonder if she feels as small and lost as you do. You are Pharaoh and Queen of Egypt, masters of temples and armies, guardians of gods and Nile. But right now, you are simply two children staring into the dark, whispering promises that sound fragile against the weight of eternity. The sun beats down hard enough to make the air shimmer, and the desert looks alive with waves of heat. You grip the edge of the chariot tighter. The leather reins slick in your hands, and your stomach does a little nervous flip. Hunting and riding aren't just sports here. They're royal proof. Pharaohs are supposed to look like warriors, hunters, lion tamers. No one's going to paint a wall carving of you losing balance and tumbling headfirst into the sand. So today, like every other time, you have to make it look effortless. Your horses snort and stamp, muscles rippling under glossy hides. They've been groomed until their manes shine, their tack inlaid with gold that flashes with each twitch. Attendants fuss around you, checking wheels, tightening straps. One even kneels to adjust the linen padding around your club foot. They do it discreetly, pretending no one notices. But you notice. Everyone does. And that's the irony. The boy king who struggles to walk is about to thunder across the desert in a symbol of royal power. Mainstream fact: chariots were central to Egyptian royal image. Tutankhamun's tomb contains 6 of them, ranging from light hunting models to heavier ceremonial versions. Reliefs show him charging lions, shooting arrows at enemies, conquering chaos with athletic ease. But reality paints a different picture. Your body's fragile. Your bones show signs of fractures and deformities. You climb into the chariot, the wood warm beneath your sandals, the polished surface gleaming in the sun. The reins slide between your fingers, and for a moment, you feel something like freedom. When the horses surge forward, the jolt rattles up your arms, the desert rushes by, and the wind cools your sweat. The world blurs, and your heart forgets the limp, the cane, the whispers. In the chariot, you are Pharaoh, as the people want to see him. Swift, unstoppable, a blur of motion. Quirky tidbit: Tutankhamun may have had a custom-made chariot designed to be extra light. Basically, the ancient version of a sports car with racing stripes. Archaeologists found one model with a particularly narrow frame, suggesting it was adapted for someone with mobility issues. So picture you, the young king, rolling up in your specialized ride, attendants whispering, "Nice wheels, your majesty." Today's hunt is staged, of course. Game has been driven into the desert edges. Ostrich, gazelle, perhaps even a lion, if the handlers feel daring. Spears and bows are stacked at your side, their shafts smooth, their flint tips glinting. As the chariot rattles forward, you raise the bow, the string taut, and the desert hum quiets into a single focus. The arrow flies, striking true, or close enough that attendants rush to make sure the kill is credited to you. The crowd cheers, musicians beat drums, and your queen watches from a shaded pavilion, her face carefully composed between admiration and worry. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun really hunted or whether attendants staged the entire show. Skeptics point to his fragile bones and clubfoot, suggesting he couldn't have sustained the physical strain. Others argue that he may have managed with help, perhaps enduring pain in exchange for the image of strength. The truth is lost in the sand, carved over with propaganda. But in this moment, you're carried by adrenaline. The horses thunder, the desert roars, and you loose arrow after arrow. Ostriches scatter, gazelles leap, attendants cheer. Dust coats your skin, sticking to sweat, stinging your eyes. You taste grit with every breath, but you feel alive in a way you rarely do inside palace walls. Here, there are no whispers, just the pounding of hooves and the sharp twang of bowstrings. Later, when the chariot slows and you climb down, your legs tremble. The pain flares, sharp and unkind, but attendants rush to support you. They lower you onto a cushioned stool under a canopy, press a goblet of watered wine into your hand, and announce loudly that Pharaoh has triumphed. Pharaoh has shown the gods his strength. You sip slowly, your hand shaking. But the cheers make the moment feel real enough. Evening comes, and the hunt turns into a feast. Fires crackle, spits turn with roasting meat, and the air fills with rich smells. You sit beside Ankhesenamun, who leans close to whisper. You nearly fell when you turned the chariot. Her voice is soft, teasing, but you can see worry in her eyes. You grin anyway, muttering something about how lions fear your mighty aim. She snorts, almost laughing, and for once, the tension lifts. Historians still argue whether these hunts were simply performances, or if the young pharaoh truly risked his frail body to prove himself. The skull fracture discovered later makes some scholars wonder, did a chariot accident play a role in his death? Was the glorious symbol of power also the weapon that undid him? But for now, you bask in the glow of firelight and praise. Your muscles sore, your bones aching, but your spirit stretched wide across the desert sky. Hunting and chariots may be dangerous, but they are also fleeting tastes of freedom. Moments where, just for a while, you're not the frail boy king or the pawn of priests. You are Pharaoh, master of the hunt, lord of the desert wind. The first thing you notice is the smell. Sharp, bitter herbs, crushed into paste, mingling with incense that curls through the chamber like restless spirits. The palace healers have gathered again. Their hands are stained green from plants, their linen robes streaked with powders. They chatter in low tones, reciting words that sound halfway between medical instructions and prayers. You sit propped on cushions, leg wrapped tightly, the dull throb reminding you that being Pharaoh doesn't spare you from pain. It just makes your suffering a public matter. You're not alone in this struggle. Illness is woven deep into your life, closer than the gold ornaments you wear, or the crown they balance on your head. Every step reminds you. Every awkward shuffle with the cane. The priests whisper that your ailments are curses sent by angry gods, punishments for hidden sins. The doctors, more practical, more mortal, offer honey for wounds, castor oil for stomach pains, and poultices that smell suspiciously like something scraped off temple walls. Mainstream fact: Tutankhamun's body tells us much about the state of medicine in your time. Modern CT scans show you had a clubfoot, scoliosis, and a compromised immune system. Evidence of malaria parasites has even been found in your remains, the world's oldest genetic proof of the disease. Ancient Egypt was no stranger to sickness. In fact, medical papyri, like the Ebers Papyrus, c. 1550 BCE, list hundreds of remedies for ailments, blending herbal cures with spells and prayers. Quirky detail: one remedy for a toothache was to pack the cavity with ground-up mouse. Yes, mouse. Another treatment for baldness? Rub a paste made of hippopotamus fat into your scalp. Imagine palace healers bringing you that concoction while assuring you, this will definitely make your hair shine, Majesty. You'd have to keep a straight royal face while thinking, I smell like the riverbank on a hot day. The healers around you are more than doctors. They're also magicians. Their work straddles two worlds, physical and divine. One kneels beside your cushions, muttering an incantation to Sekhmet, lion-headed goddess of plague and healing. Another sprinkles powdered malachite into a bowl of beer, stirring it until the surface glows green, then hands it to you with solemnity. You sip reluctantly. It tastes like someone mixed sand with sour fruit, but everyone watches, waiting for you to swallow. Historians still debate how effective these treatments really were. On the one hand, Egyptian medicine included sophisticated knowledge, suturing wounds, setting fractures, diagnosing diabetes by tasting urine. On the other hand, for diseases like malaria or congenital deformities, there was little they could truly do. Some scholars argue that your fragile health was worsened by the very inbreeding that secured dynastic power. Cousins marrying cousins may have kept the bloodline pure, but it also meant fragile bones and frail lungs. Night falls, and your chamber glows with oil lamps. The priests arrive, chanting to Thoth, god of wisdom, to guide the healer's hands. They tie amulets around your wrists, carved from faience, inscribed with protective spells. One is shaped like the eye of Horus, meant to guard you from harm. Another is a scarab, symbol of rebirth. They press cool stone against your skin, murmuring words so old they've worn grooves into human memory. Sometimes, when the pain grows too sharp, you wonder which matters more, the medicine or the faith. Do the herbs soothe because they truly heal, or because the gods listen? Perhaps both. In Egypt, there is no clean line between science and religion. Healing is a tapestry, threads of logic and magic woven so tightly together, you can't pull one without unraveling the other. You close your eyes, the taste of herbs still on your tongue, the faint rattle of amulets against your skin. You drift between waking and sleep, caught in the rhythm of chants and the memory of fever. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, the Nile flows steadily, eternal and patient. And you wonder, are you in the hands of doctors or the gods themselves? Maybe, in this land, it's impossible to tell. The crown weighs more than gold should. It presses into your scalp, the band tight, the cobra and vulture jutting forward like guardians, or perhaps burdens. You are Pharaoh, son of the sun, chosen of Amun. At least, that's what the priests remind you. But beneath the shimmering headdress, your neck aches, your back strains, and deep down, you know that your body, thin, fragile, never as strong as the carved images on temple walls, doesn't always match the role carved for you. Every morning is a battle before the politics even begin. Rising from the bed is no simple act. Your joints resist, stiff and aching. Servants help you sit upright, balancing your weight as though you were an old man rather than a boy king. A walking cane waits by your side, carved from polished wood, tipped with ivory. It's not just an accessory, it is your companion, as essential as breath. Mainstream fact: over 130 walking sticks were found in Tutankhamun's tomb, many worn down at the tips from constant use. This wasn't ceremony, it was necessity. CT scans of your mummy reveal a clubfoot and bone necrosis in your leg, suggesting every step caused pain. Unlike the muscular gods painted on temple walls, you lived with frailty that no chisel or pigment could disguise. The palace whispers about it. They never dare say it outright, but you see it in their eyes. Advisors wonder if your body can bear the strain of rule. Courtiers bow deeply, their faces unreadable. But behind them, the gossip spreads. Can the king of Upper and Lower Egypt stand long enough to lead his armies? Can he produce heirs with a body so weakened? Quirky detail. Egyptians didn't hide disability with shame. In fact, dwarves and individuals with physical differences often held honored positions in court. One high official, Seneb, was a dwarf who achieved remarkable status under earlier pharaohs. Yet for you, the expectation is different. You're supposed to be the living Horus, the embodiment of strength itself. That contradiction gnaws at the palace's confidence. The ceremonies demand appearances. You sit on a golden throne during festivals. Heavy jewelry draped across your thin chest. Priests raise hymns. Soldiers cheer. The people call out blessings. You lift your hand in ritual gestures, fingers trembling slightly beneath the weight of the crook and flail. And in that moment, you realize symbols matter more than muscle. As long as you can sit upright in regalia, as long as the crown gleams under the sun, Egypt believes. But in the quiet hours, when the crown is set aside, when the sandals are slipped from your swollen feet, doubt creeps in. You trace the line of your leg, twisted, tender, wrapped in bandages soaked in honey and herbs. You wonder if the gods gave you this body as a test, or as a cruel reminder that power is never without cost. Historians still debate whether your condition was purely genetic, the result of close royal marriages, or whether injuries from accidents compounded your weakness. Some propose your father Akhenaten's revolutionary focus on the Aten may have distracted from palace health and stability, leaving his heirs vulnerable. Others argue that your frailty made you a puppet, controlled by advisors like I and Horemheb, who used your youth and weakness to advance their own power. And yet, despite it all, you wear the crown, you appear in ceremonies, you sign decrees, you make offerings to the gods. Frail though you may be, you are still Pharaoh. Egypt has survived floods and famines, invasions and revolts. Now it survives under you, a boy with bones too brittle for war, but a will strong enough to hold the symbols of kingship. As you lie down at night, servants placing amulets by your bed and smoothing cool linens across your chest, you feel both crushed and lifted by the crown's weight. It is heavier than gold, heavier than stone. It is the weight of two lands, of gods, of ancestors. And though your body falters, the crown does not. You close your eyes and whisper to yourself, if the body fails, the crown still stands. The sun rises over Thebes, casting its light on the painted columns and wide courtyards of your palace. The city stirs with chants to Amun. Drums echo through the streets, and messengers already hurry toward the gates. Their sandals slap against the dust, their faces tense. They bring you words no pharaoh ever wants to hear. Enemies press at Egypt's borders. Beyond the painted walls of your golden chambers, Egypt is not as eternal as the priests claim. To the north, restless Hittites stir in their mountain fortresses. They march with chariots of iron-rimmed wheels, their warriors clad in bronze that glints sharper than the Nile's reflection. To the south, Nubian tribes test the cataracts of the river, daring to probe Egypt's long reach. Even in Canaan, your vassal kings bicker and rebel, writing desperate clay tablets to your palace in Akkadian, begging for Egyptian soldiers to come protect them. Mainstream fact, The Amarna letters, a collection of clay tablets found in Akhenaten city, preserve the voices of these Canaanite rulers. They cry out in panic about bandits, invasions, and rival princes. Some beg for gold, others for troops. All of them reveal how fragile Egypt's empire had become. The words still exist, baked hard in clay, their wedge-shaped writing a chorus of fear. But Egypt's danger does not only come from without. Inside your court, factions sharpen their knives in silence. You are Pharaoh? Yes, but you are also young, and your frail body makes the generals whisper. Behind fans of ostrich feathers and masks of obedience, advisors scheme. Some align with the priests of Amun, thrilled at the restoration of their temples after your father's heresy. Others keep to the army, rallying behind Horemheb, the commander of troops, who speaks often of glory, of discipline, of Egypt's right to dominate. And then there's I, the seasoned courtier, your vizier, who seems to hover in every shadow, ready to guide or perhaps to control. His voice is soft, his words polished, but his hands are steady on the levers of power. One day, he praises you as a living god. The next, he reminds you of your duty, steering decisions as though the Nile's current itself flows through him. Quirky detail. In Egyptian politics, loyalty wasn't always declared with words. It was shown with gifts of food. A courtier's allegiance might be revealed by where his offerings went, whether to the temple of Amun, to the royal kitchens, or to a rival's household. Even in your palace, the smell of roasted duck and honey cakes can carry political weight. Their destination, a subtle message of favor. The factions circle each other like crocodiles in shallow water, waiting for the moment to strike. When a messenger reports another raid on Egypt's borders, Horemheb slams his staff, demanding more troops. I counsels patience, urging diplomacy instead. The priests chant that the gods will protect Egypt if only the temples are fed with greater offerings. All of them look to you, the boy in the throne, the crown heavy on your head. Your hand trembles slightly as you raise the crook and flail. And yet, you're not blind. You see how each man measures you, not for what you are, but for what you represent. To them, you're not Tutankhamun, the boy. You're Pharaoh, the living Horus, the one who holds Egypt's destiny in delicate hands. And so you nod at Horemheb. You listen to I. You grant offerings to Amun's priests. You give each faction enough to believe they have your ear, enough to keep them from turning openly against one another. Historians debate how much control you truly had. Some argue you were a puppet, your advisors pulling the strings, while you served as a figurehead. Others suggest you were sharper than your fragile body implied, playing the factions against one another, ensuring no single power could overtake your throne. The truth may lie in the middle. A pharaoh constrained, but not powerless, weaving authority through ritual and symbol as much as decree. Enemies beyond the Nile test your borders. Enemies within your palace test your crown. Both wait for weakness. Both hunger for a slip, a fracture, a faltering step. But each morning, you rise. Each morning, you sit upon the golden throne, the double crown gleaming under Ra's gaze. Egypt may wobble, but it does not fall. Not yet. And as the drums of war echo faintly from the north, and whispers coil through your palace halls. You whisper a prayer to yourself, the boy king with a frail body and a heavy crown. Let them see the Pharaoh, not the fractures. The sun in Egypt's desert doesn't just shine, it devours. It burns down so fiercely that even the golden cobra on your crown seems to hiss with heat. And yet, as Pharaoh, you ride at the front of your column, your chariot's wheels kicking up clouds of dust as your army pushes into the endless sands. Word has come that raiders from the deserts to the west, Libyans, fierce and lean, hardened by lives without the Nile's blessings, have crossed into your lands. They do not march with great armies like the Hittites, nor raise temples to foreign gods. Instead, they come like jackals, swift and hungry, their warriors wrapped in leather and feathers, moving through dunes as easily as fish through water. They strike villages, seize cattle, and vanish again into the desert wastes. And Egypt cannot ignore them. To do so would be weakness. To do so would invite not only the Libyans, but every restless neighbor who watches to see if the boy king has a pharaoh's spine. So you ride out. The desert stretches before you, an ocean without water. Sand dunes rise like waves, shimmering beneath the cruel horizon. The air itself quivers in mirages, bending shapes into phantoms. A grove of palms, a pool of water, the shape of a caravan that vanishes as soon as you blink. Your soldiers march in lines behind you, their shields clattering, their spears glinting. Some mutter prayers to Amun. Others tie cloth around their mouths to keep the dust from choking them. Mainstream fact: Egyptian armies facing Libyans often depicted them in temple reliefs. Men with long hair, feathers in their headbands, and tattoos on their arms. These desert tribes were skilled at ambush and mobility. Campaigns against them were as much about endurance and supply as they were about direct battle. The hardest enemy in the desert is not always the man across from you. It is thirst. It is distance. It is the sun itself. Your quartermasters have packed water skins and jars of beer. Your scribes carefully recording rations for each unit. The army's cattle march in the rear, not just as food, but as living canteens. Their blood and milk could sustain the men if the worst came. But still, the desert punishes. By midday, your lips are cracked. Your soldiers' sandals wear thin. And even the horses snort and stumble in the shifting dunes. And then the Libyans appear, not as a great wall of men, but as a whisper of motion along the horizon. Chariots, faster and lighter than your own, dart across the dunes. Arrows whistle through the hot air, thudding into shields and sand. A sudden cry goes up as an Egyptian soldier collapses, a shaft piercing his shoulder. Horemheb, your general, bellows for formation. Shields rise. Arrows are loosed in return, black streaks against the blinding sky. You hold the reins of your chariot steady, your heart pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of expectation. Pharaoh must be seen. Pharaoh must not flinch. Your driver lashes the horses, and you surge forward, the desert wind stinging your face. Quirky detail: Egyptian soldiers often painted protective gods on their shields before campaign. Bes, the dwarf god, grinning with his tongue out, or Taweret, the hippo goddess of protection. To a soldier, this was as essential as food and water. In your army, The shields gleam with those faces, comical and fierce at once, like a marching gallery of divine graffiti. The clash is sudden. The Libyans dart in, their spears stabbing, their cries sharp and shrill like desert hawks. Your men hold, pushing forward with steady shields and stabbing bronze. Dust rises in choking clouds. Men stumble, horses scream. A Libyan chariot swerves close to yours, its rider wild-eyed, his face painted with ochre. For a moment, it feels as though the desert has shrunk to this single heartbeat, this single duel. You raise your bow, the string tight as the air itself. The arrow flies. The rider falls. Your men see. They cheer, not for the arrow itself, but because Pharaoh fights among them, not behind palace walls. The desert campaign is not only about crushing raiders, it is about proving that Egypt's boy king is no puppet. The battle lasts into the afternoon, long enough that the sun itself feels like a weapon pressing against both sides. But slowly, the Libyans scatter. They melt back into the dunes, leaving behind only the fallen and the silence of hot wind. Egypt stands. Historians debate these desert campaigns. Some argue they were exaggerated in temple reliefs, more propaganda than war. Others believe the raids were real, constant, gnawing at Egypt's edges like rats at grain. What is certain is that for pharaohs, especially one young and fragile, the campaign was more than survival. It was theater. It was a message to every ally, every enemy, every whispering courtier. Pharaoh rides, Pharaoh fights, Pharaoh endures. When night finally falls, the desert cools to a sharp chill. The stars blaze above you, millions of them, scattered like jewels on black velvet. Your soldiers huddle around fires, their laughter weary but alive. In the distance, a lone jackal howls. And you, Pharaoh Tutankhamun, sit in your chariot by the embers, the desert wind tugging at your cloak. For a moment, you allow yourself a smile. Egypt still breathes. And so do you. The desert wind still lingers in your hair when you see it. Luxor, not just a city, but a crown of stone and gold laid upon the banks of the Nile. After weeks of sand, sweat, and blood, its sight is like a mirage that does not fade. A city where temples rise like mountains, where banners flap in the river breeze, and where the people of Egypt gather in numbers too great to count. Your army's return is a procession. Chariots roll first, their bronze wheels shining in the sun. Behind them come the infantry, shields slung across their backs, carrying the dust of the desert in their sandals. The Libyans may have melted back into their sands, but Egypt's soldiers return as victors. And at the center of it all, you ride in your own chariot, crown gleaming, eyes steady. Pharaoh returns. Luxor itself erupts in sound. Women ululate from rooftops, tossing garlands of lotus and papyrus flowers down upon the road. Children run along the edges of the column, laughing, trying to touch the horses' manes. Priests swing censers heavy with incense, their smoke curling sweetly into the air, masking the lingering smell of sweat and leather. Mainstream fact: Luxor, ancient Thebes, was not just a political capital, but a religious one. Every pharaoh who wished to be seen as legitimate had to return here, to stand before the temple of Amun at Karnak, and the temple of Luxor. Victory in the desert was one thing, but victory before the gods and their priests was another. As your chariot rattles across the avenue of sphinxes, the long road lined with hundreds of carved lions with human heads, the people bow, and a chant rises like a wave. Life, prosperity, health. To the pharaoh, the soldiers beam with pride, puffing their chests, their exhaustion forgotten. For them, the return is more intoxicating than victory itself. For the people, your face is more than a boy's. It is Egypt's youth, Egypt's promise, Egypt's God-King in flesh. But you know better. Behind the painted walls, behind the cheering, Egypt still trembles. Grain is tight. Rivals mutter. The Libyans are not gone forever. And above all, the priests of Amun are watching. Always watching. At Karnak, the gates swing wide, carved pylons towering above you like cliffs. Torches flare, drums thunder, and the priests emerge in shimmering white linen, their bald heads gleaming, their hands raised in reverence. They welcome you not as a weary boy, but as Horus returned in triumph. Quirky detail. Before entering the temple, priests often purified Pharaoh by sprinkling him with water drawn from the Nile, called the living waters. It was half cleansing, half divine insurance, because even kings sweat in the desert. And so, before the eyes of all Egypt, cool drops splash across your skin, washing away dust, cooling the sting of sunburn. To the people, it is symbolic. To you, it simply feels good. Inside the temple, the air grows dim and heavy with incense. Columns rise like forests, painted with the victories of pharaohs before you. Thutmose, Amenhotep, Ramesses, giants whose names still echo. Your victories will be carved here too, though some scribes may sharpen the truth until it gleams brighter than reality. After all, no pharaoh ever lost, at least not in stone. Historians still debate, were these triumphs real or largely theater for the masses? Were the Libyan raids crushed or simply managed? Was Pharaoh ever truly in danger? Or did generals like Horemheb bear the real weight of battle? To the people of Luxor, such questions do not matter. They see you return. They see Egypt stand. And that is enough. The night is celebration. Torches light the city, musicians play sistrums and drums, and dancers whirl in the courtyards. The Nile reflects it all, a black mirror streaked with fire. Wine flows, bread is broken. Lotus blossoms are worn in hair and tucked behind ears. For one night, famine, desert, and politics are forgotten. You, seated upon a golden throne, carried into the temple, raise a cup to your lips. The sweet wine tastes of grapes, grown far to the north, watered by the same Nile that laps at Luxor's shores. Around you, courtiers bow, priests chant, soldiers laugh. For the first time in weeks, you let yourself sink back into the cushions, your body aching, but your spirit lifted. And yet, as the music swells and the people cheer, you cannot shake a thought. Luxor is no simple homecoming. It is also a reckoning. Every triumph is a promise to be renewed. Every cheer is an expectation to be met again. Pharaoh is never allowed to rest for long. But for tonight, under the torches of Luxor, as the city sings your name into the stars, you allow yourself the luxury of believing it. You are Pharaoh. Egypt lives. The desert campaign fades into memory, replaced by something just as dangerous in its own way: palace feasting. Luxor at night is no quiet sanctuary. It is a furnace of sound and color, where courtyards blaze with torchlight. The Nile breeze carries music through pillared halls, and every noble in Egypt seems to gather under the same roof with one purpose: to celebrate Pharaoh's glory. And celebrate they do, with food, drink, and spectacle enough to drown even the strongest man. You are led into the banquet hall on a wave of perfume and laughter. Bronze lamps sputter and glow. Servants scatter lotus petals under your feet, their fragrance mixing with roasted meats and spiced wine. Columns rise like painted forests, their capitals decorated with palm and papyrus, their surfaces already catching shadows from the flickering light. At the center of it all is the table, or rather, a series of long, low tables, groaning under the weight of Egypt's excess. Loaves of bread stacked in pyramids, honey dripping from figs, roasted ducks stuffed with herbs, bowls of dates and pomegranates gleaming like jewels. The Nile itself seems emptied onto the platters. Tilapia, catfish, and eels, grilled and salted. Baskets of lotus roots, jars of fermented fish sauce, prized for its tang. Mainstream fact: Egyptian banquets were legendary, both as religious offerings and social spectacles. Beer and wine flowed freely, food was abundant, and musicians, dancers, and acrobats performed while guests indulged. Banquets were not merely private, they were public displays of wealth, power, and piety. The nobles bow as you take your seat, golden throne gleaming above a heap of lotus cushions. Then the flood begins. Slaves and servants glide between tables, refilling cups of red wine brought from vineyards of the delta, pouring cool water mixed with herbs, offering plates stacked high. Musicians pluck harps, strike sistrums, and sing praises of your campaign. Quirky detail: one trick of Egyptian banquets was the drinking tally. Guests often wore little cone-shaped lumps of perfumed wax on their heads. As the night warmed, the wax slowly melted, releasing fragrance, but also marking the passage of time. If your perfumed cone was gone before the music stopped, you'd probably drunk too much. By midnight, many cones are puddled into oily stains. The nobles, once refined and serious, now sway, laugh, and shout over one another. Hierarchies blur at the bottom of a wine jar. The strict priest, who earlier demanded your ritual purity, now slurs a toast so grand even the scribes grin. And yet, there is danger here. Banquets are not only feasts, they are theaters of politics. Every noble watches who sits closest to Pharaoh, whose cup is refilled first, whose joke makes you smile. Power shifts, not only in council halls, but in the angle of your glance and the favor of a shared dish. Scholarly debate. Some argue that these feasts were where Egypt's court politics truly unfolded, the public ceremonies being only the surface. Banquets allowed alliances, rivalries, and even conspiracies to brew over wine. Others argue they were largely ornamental, with real decisions made elsewhere. But in the smoke and laughter, it's hard not to feel the weight of eyes measuring you. Dancers enter now, their limbs glistening with oil, moving in spirals and arcs that mimic the stars. Acrobats tumble through the hall, balancing cups on their heads. A dwarf juggler tosses golden apples to delighted laughter. Priests clap in rhythm, their earlier solemnity washed away by the banquet's tide. You sip from your cup, letting the sweet, sharp taste of wine fill your mouth. The laughter, the music, the perfume, the heat, all of it presses in, intoxicating and overwhelming. Egypt in excess, but excess is a double-edged gift. Too much indulgence breeds weakness. Too much wine invites loose tongues. And too much feasting while the grain stores run thin in the countryside risks the loyalty of your people. Still, tonight, you cannot refuse it. The courtiers watch. The priests measure. The generals linger at the edge of the feast, speaking little, drinking less, their eyes on you. Every bite, every sip is as much performance as pleasure. The night stretches long. You watch the wax cones melt, the music rise and fall. The nobles slip from elegance into abandon. By dawn, the banquet hall will stink of spilt wine and overturned dishes. But for now, the world is alive with music and laughter, the Nile carrying echoes of your triumph out into the dark. And above it all, you sit, Pharaoh, boy king, guest of honor, and ringmaster both, smiling as though the excess belongs to you, even as you feel how heavy it sits on your crown. The echoes of laughter from the banquet still drift in your ears as you're carried back through the palace's moonlit halls. Incense clings to your clothes, wine lingers on your tongue, and the weight of too many eyes still presses on your shoulders. Luxor slumbers in the darkness, but the palace is never truly asleep. Torches hiss, sandals scrape over stone floors, and whispers move like currents through every chamber. That is when the accident happens. Or perhaps not an accident at all. It begins with a sound in the night. The crash of pottery, the sudden cry of a servant, a scuffle half hidden behind a garden wall. You're roused from your restless doze, heavy with wine, to find attendants scrambling with lamps. Their faces glow pale, and their words fall in hurried fragments. Stumbled, fell. The boy king is safe, yet nothing in their eyes matches their mouths. You stumble to your feet. The moon pours silver over the courtyard, and there, by the steps of the lotus pool, a body lies twisted. One of the palace guards, a man you know only by sight. His spear clattered aside, his chest still. The cause is unclear. Did he slip on the wet stone? Did someone push him? Mainstream fact: Tutankhamun's death remains a mystery in history. Examinations of his mummy revealed possible injuries, fractured bones, damage to the skull, and even suggestions of poisoning. Scholars still debate whether his end was an accident, illness, or deliberate plot. The court whispers faster than the Nile floods. Some claim the guard drank too much at the banquet. Others mutter he was silenced before his loose tongue could spill something dangerous. You notice a dark smear across the wall. Wine or blood? The smell is hard to tell in the torchlight. Quirky detail. Egyptians had no word for accident in the way we use it today. Everything was bound to mat, order, or isfet, chaos. If a guard died, the question was not simply how, but why. Had the gods turned their faces away, or had men broken divine balance through treachery? The priests arrive before dawn, their linen pristine despite the hour. They make gestures of purity over the body, chanting hymns to banish disorder. Yet even as they pray, their eyes cut toward you, sharp, measuring, as though already weighing how this shadow in the night will be interpreted. A careless accident? Or an omen against your reign? The palace is a hive by morning. Rumors crawl everywhere. Some say the boy king himself was targeted, that the guard's death was a warning, or a botched attempt on your life. Others say nothing at all, but their silence is louder than words. Scholarly debate. Tutankhamun's short life fuels endless speculation. Some historians point to the damage on his remains as proof of assassination. Others insist it was post-mortem mishandling or natural illness, like malaria. Still others whisper of court factions eager to place a stronger puppet on the throne. No certainty exists, only shadows. You sit in your chamber as the sun rises, staring at the pools of light creeping across the walls. Outside, Thebes wakes as if nothing has changed. Vendors shout in the markets. Fishermen haul nets from the river. Scribes sharpen their reeds. Yet inside the palace, tension coils tighter. The laughter of last night's banquet feels far away, replaced by silence heavy enough to choke. Perhaps it was nothing. A guard who drank too deeply, slipped, and met his end by the pool. Yet even if it was only that, the court will not see it as nothing. Every stumble is a sign, every shadow a threat. And in your bones, boy king, you feel it too. The crown is never heavier than in the still hours before dawn, when whispers echo louder than music, and you wonder whether you will survive long enough to see another banquet, another hunt, another morning. The palace is quieter now, but not calmer. Silence no longer feels like peace. It feels like waiting. Days pass, yet the unease from that accident in the night lingers like smoke after a fire. Servants avoid dark corners. Guards exchange wary glances. And when priests sweep through with their incense and chants, their voices sound strained, as though even they doubt the words. And then comes the revelation. It begins in whispers, as always. A physician, one of the royal healers, summoned to inspect your fragile body yet again, pauses too long over a scroll. He does not know you are watching. He does not know the flicker of his eyes gives him away. You rise from your couch, still aching from the stiffness in your leg, and demand to know. He stammers, fumbling for words, before finally bowing low and confessing, "There is a fracture, my Pharaoh." At the back of the skull, your breath catches. For a moment, you cannot tell if he speaks of the dead guard or of you. Mainstream fact. Modern CT scans of Tutankhamun's mummy revealed fragments of bone in the skull cavity. Some scholars once argued this was evidence of a violent blow to the head, possible assassination. Later studies suggested it may have been caused after death, either during mummification or mishandling in modern times. Still, the image of a fractured skull has fueled the boy king's legend for decades. The physician explains cautiously, as though each word might summon a curse. The injury, he says, could have happened in life. Yes, a strike, a fall, a terrible accident. But it could also be post-mortem, damage during embalming, when priests were hurried or clumsy, or when resin burned too hot and cracked the delicate bone. He bows again, sweating, knowing that in your court, the difference between accident and murder can be fatal. Quirky detail. Ancient Egyptian embalmers sometimes poured boiling resin into the skull cavity of a mummy to preserve it. In Tutankhamun's case, modern researchers found charred flesh and bones, suggesting his body may have literally caught fire inside the coffin after burial. A grisly accident of chemistry mistaken for signs of violence. The revelation spreads like floodwater. Advisors, viziers, and priests argue in hushed tones. Some insist it was merely the embalming. Others clutch their amulets tighter, muttering that the gods would never allow such desecration unless there was deeper guilt to hide. And then comes the sharpest whisper. What if it was no accident at all? You feel it creeping toward you, that question, as though it were a serpent in the reeds. A blow to the head would explain too much. The weakness, the fainting spells, the dizziness that sometimes overtakes you when you rise too quickly. Could it be that you already walk wounded? Could it be that even as Pharaoh, your body carries the mark of betrayal? Scholarly debate. Some researchers believe Tutankhamun suffered a serious leg fracture shortly before death, infected beyond healing. Others claim the skull fragments prove violence. Still others argue the damage was caused by excavation tools in the 1920s, when Carter's team pried apart the brittle remains with hot knives and paraffin. History cannot decide, and so speculation thrives. At night, you sit in your chamber, lamps flickering low. You reach up to the back of your head, fingers brushing through your hair, half expecting to feel the crack beneath your skin. You think of the guard who died by the lotus pool, the factions who murmur in the halls, the marriages and alliances stitched together with gold and incense. The crown gleams on its stand beside you, heavy, glittering, eternal. But beneath it, the skull is so fragile, you wonder. If one day you were to fall, would they call it an accident? Or would they whisper, as they do now, of poison, plots, and fractures in the dark? The Nile rolls on, eternal, indifferent. But you, boy king, are only flesh and bone. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, someone is waiting for that bone to break. The end comes not with a glorious battle cry or a thunderous proclamation from the gods, but with a whisper, as sudden and inexplicable as the desert wind. One evening, you sit among your companions, wine in hand, the scent of roasted goose drifting through the banquet hall, music lilting from harp and sistrum. You are tired, always tired these days, but you smile and laugh when you can, hiding the weakness that creeps through your limbs. And then, one morning, you do not rise. The palace stills. Servants tiptoe through the halls, waiting for word. Courtiers gather in tight clusters, their eyes darting like startled doves. Outside the palace gates, Thebes bustles as always, merchants crying their wares, donkeys braying under heavy loads. But inside, time halts. The boy king is dead. Mainstream fact. Tutankhamun likely died suddenly, at around 18 or 19 years of age. The exact cause remains debated. Scholars have suggested anything from malaria to septicemia, from a broken leg, from sickle cell disease to congenital defects due to inbreeding. Yet to the people of Egypt, the pharaoh's sudden death would have been a shock. A divine ruler does not simply vanish unless the gods themselves will it. In the hours after, confusion reigns. Was it sickness that claimed you? The fever that had lingered and left you weak? Was it the festering injury to your leg, broken and never properly healed? Or was it something darker? Advisors mutter behind closed doors. Priests shuffle nervously. And soldiers sharpen their spears, though no battle has been declared. Quirky detail. In ancient Egypt, death was not considered the end, but a continuation. Yet the manner of death mattered deeply. A good death, surrounded by family and ritual, was a blessing. A sudden, unexplained one carried a whiff of chaos, of Isfet, the antithesis of Ma'at, the cosmic order Pharaoh was sworn to uphold. The vizier steps forward to calm the whispers. He proclaims that the Pharaoh's soul has flown to the gods, that Amun himself has chosen his young son to dwell among the eternal. But his voice cracks just slightly, and the silence afterward is heavier than stone. Debate among scholars. Was Tutankhamun's death an accident, his frail body succumbing to disease? Or was it engineered by those who stood to gain? Some point to evidence of his fractured skull or broken leg as suspicious. Others argue his health was already too precarious, his death inevitable. Still, the suddenness fuels endless speculation. For you, there is no speculation, no whispering court, no frantic preparations. One moment you are present in the chamber, body fragile yet warm, heart still beating against the weight of the crown. And the next, all fades to silence. But for Egypt, your absence is louder than any shout. The boy who had restored the gods, who had walked the palaces of Memphis and the fields of Karnak, who had smiled despite his frailty, gone. And with you goes the fragile balance of the throne. In the shadows of the palace, those who once swore loyalty now calculate futures. Generals count armies, priests weigh omens, widowed queens weep, or perhaps plot. The golden throne is suddenly empty, and in Egypt, an empty throne is more dangerous than an enemy's sword. The Nile flows on, as it always has, eternal and unbothered. But the boy king, Tutankhamun, has crossed its final horizon, and for those left behind, your sudden death is not just grief, it is opportunity. The wheels begin turning almost before your body has cooled. Death in Egypt is never a simple matter, not when it is the pharaoh who has fallen. Yet for you, there is no time for the lavish preparations that a god king deserves. Everything is hurried. Everything feels pressed, as though someone is determined to move past this moment as quickly as possible. The court whispers that the stars should have aligned for 70 days of mourning, the sacred span in which the body is embalmed, the Ka and Ba guided toward their journey through the afterlife. But in your case, days are compressed, rites performed in haste, resin poured too hot on your linen wrapping sears and blackens your flesh, leaving modern scientists to puzzle centuries later at the strange burns across your remains. Mainstream fact: Tutankhamun's burial was almost certainly rushed. His tomb is unusually small for a pharaoh, more fitting for a nobleman. The walls were painted quickly, some parts still damp when sealed. Some artifacts appear repurposed, objects taken from someone else's funerary goods, and hastily altered with his name. Quirky detail: in one corner of the burial chamber, traces of fungus bloom across the painted walls. It seems the plaster had not fully dried when sealed, moisture trapped within. Pharaohs were meant to rest in perfection, but your chamber carries signs of imperfection, a slapdash urgency that feels almost disrespectful. Your widow, Ankhesenamun, is seen draped in black, her hair undone. Grief or performance? In her heart, panic takes root. A pharaoh's death without a son means danger. She is vulnerable, a queen without a king. To buy safety, she writes secretly to a foreign king, begging for a husband of royal blood, even if it means inviting a Hittite prince into Egypt's heart. Desperation lingers over her every step. The priests, meanwhile, chant the ancient words over your body, though their eyes keep flicking to the generals and the vizier. Who holds power now? Who commands the army, the temples, the treasury? In your coffin, you are arrayed with splendor, golden mask, beaded collar, protective amulets. But the hall outside thrums with tension, debate among scholars. Why the rush? Some argue that your unexpected death caught artisans unprepared, and a modest tomb had to be adapted. Others suggest politics, the need to stabilize the throne, to bury you quickly so that attention could shift to succession. A few whisper something darker, that haste was meant to cover up a murder, to silence inquiry before questions could take root. The funeral procession moves through Thebes with solemnity. Musicians wail, women scatter dust in their hair, mourners lift their arms to the sky. Yet even this display feels rehearsed, abbreviated. The gods are honored, the rites fulfilled, but the heart of it, lingering grief, sacred waiting, is stripped away, and so you are lowered into your chamber, sealed away with your treasures. No grand valley tomb, carved to rival Ramses or Seti, just a cramped resting place, walls glowing with hastily painted scenes of Osiris, Anubis, and the promise of rebirth. The entrance is closed, plastered over, hidden beneath rubble. The living turn back toward the palace. Already, new alliances are being struck, new oaths sworn in shadow. For them, the pharaoh is gone. For you, the journey is only beginning, because in Egypt, the dead live forever. Whether their funeral was rushed or not, the pharaoh is gone. The golden mask glitters in the darkness of the tomb, sealed behind plaster and rubble. But the world outside will not stop moving. And for Ankhesenamun, young widow of Tutankhamun, the world has suddenly become a very dangerous place. She is no ordinary queen. She's the last living daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, sister wife to the boy king, and now a woman standing alone in a court filled with men who smell weakness like jackals on the desert wind. At 18, perhaps 19 years old, she has no son to guard her throne, no husband to shield her. Mainstream fact: what we know of her fear comes from one of the most astonishing letters in ancient history, found in the archives of the Hittite capital, Hattusa. Ankhesenamun an Egyptian queen whose husband had died, wrote to King Suppiluliuma III. She begged him to send her a son to marry, promising him the crown of Egypt. No Egyptian queen had ever done such a thing. In the letter she says, "Never shall I take a servant of mine and make him my husband. I am afraid, afraid." A queen of Egypt, voice trembling on papyrus, revealing to a foreign king that she is trapped. It is almost unthinkable, quirky detail. To prove the letter was real, Suppiluliuma actually sent an envoy to Egypt, half suspecting it was some sort of prank. Imagine the scene: messengers arriving at the Nile, dusty and confused, asking if the Queen of Egypt really wanted to marry a Hittite prince. This was history's version of a "did I read that right?" double check. Inside the palace, however, Ankhesenamun's desperation is not whispered. It is shouted in the form of politics. I, the elderly vizier, has long stood in the shadows, watching kings rise and fall. Now he sees a chance to rule in his own right. General Horemheb, commander of the armies, lurks too, bristling at the thought of foreign hands on Egypt's throne. Both men circle like hawks. Scholarly debate. Why did Ankhesenamun risk everything by appealing to a foreign enemy? Some argue she truly feared being forced into marriage with a man old enough to be her grandfather. Others believe she was playing a clever game, trying to secure a powerful ally against Horemheb. A darker theory is that she had no choice. Perhaps I already had her cornered, and the Hittites were her last desperate escape. The Hittite king, tempted by the prize of Egypt, agrees. He sends his son, Prince Zananza, to marry Ankhesenamun. But the story does not end in a wedding. Somewhere near the Egyptian border, Zananza is ambushed and killed, murdered. By whose hand? The Egyptians deny it. The Hittites accuse them. Some point to Horemheb's army, unwilling to let a foreign prince step foot in Egypt as pharaoh. Others blame Ai, who needed Ankhesenamun for himself. Either way, the queen's last hope is dashed in blood. Ankhesenamun vanishes from the records soon after. Her name fades from inscriptions, her voice silenced. Was she forced to marry Ai? Did she die young, discarded, once she was no longer useful? Or was she eliminated, erased deliberately from memory? For one brief moment, her letter lets us hear her heart, her fear, her desperation, her refusal to be swallowed by the designs of others. It is a cry from 3,000 years ago, fragile and trembling, but it survives still. And in that cry, you can almost hear the echo of a woman standing alone in a palace of whispers, staring at the future and finding nothing but shadows. The tomb lies sealed. The incense has burned away, and the desert wind howls across the valley of the kings. Tutankhamun is gone, but his death leaves behind a question sharp as a dagger's edge. Who wanted him gone? It is a question that still lingers more than 3,000 years later, because the boy king's end feels too sudden, too tangled in palace intrigue to be a simple matter of fate. He was young, frail perhaps, but not expected to vanish so quickly. And around his golden shadow, suspects abound. Mainstream fact. Modern science shows Tutankhamun suffered from multiple ailments: malaria, bone disorders, and a fractured leg that may have been infected. These findings point to natural causes, but they do not silence the darker whispers that his death was hastened by human hands. Quirky detail. When Tutankhamun's mummy was first examined in the 1960s, scientists noticed something strange. His ribs were missing, entirely gone. Later scans showed signs of burning, as if his body had spontaneously combusted after burial, thanks to a chemical reaction between oils and oxygen. Imagine being a 20th century researcher and thinking, did we just find history's only case of Pharaoh barbecue? But back in Thebes, the rumors weren't about chemistry. They were about daggers, plots, and ambition. Suspect 1. I, the vizier. Old, sharp-eyed, and endlessly patient. I had guided Tutankhamun since childhood. Too patient, some thought. When the king died, I stepped smoothly into the throne, conducting the burial rites himself, an act usually reserved for a son. Was this loyalty or calculation? Did he see the boy as nothing more than a stepping stone to power? Suspect 2. Horemheb, the general, the commander of Egypt's armies, frustrated by Tutankhamun's weakness and the lingering shame of Akhenaten's heresy. Perhaps he thought Egypt needed a soldier, not a frail child, on the throne. Killing Tut might have cleared the way, except I outmaneuvered him first. Suspect 3. Ankhesenamun herself. Whispers, darker still, suggest the queen had reason to conspire. Trapped in a loveless marriage, fearful of being forced into A's arms. Maybe she reached for another path, though the surviving letter to the Hittites suggests fear, not blood, was her weapon. Scholarly debate. Was Tutankhamun murdered, or merely unlucky? Some researchers point to CT scans showing a fracture at the back of his skull, consistent with a violent blow. Others argue this was damage done after death, during mummification, or even by Howard Carter's team in the 1920s. The broken leg, they argue, combined with infection and malaria, might have been enough to kill him. Still, the whispers linger. A boy king dies suddenly. His widow writes in desperation to foreign enemies. A prince on the way to Egypt is murdered. An old vizier crowns himself pharaoh. A general seethes in the background. It reads less like history and more like the script of a palace thriller. Poison in a wine cup. A dagger in the shadows. Sandals whispering across polished limestone floors at midnight. And perhaps that is why Tutankhamun's story endures. His tomb gave us golden treasure beyond imagination. But his death gave us something rarer, a mystery unsolved, a question forever hanging in the desert air. Who wanted him gone? The boy who once wore the double crown of Egypt now lies in silence, or rather, he did, until modern science began poking, scanning, and sometimes clumsily prodding his body in search of answers. If Tutankhamun had hoped for eternal peace, well, 21st century curiosity had other plans. From the moment Howard Carter cracked open the tomb in 1922, Tut's mummy became an obsession. At first, it wasn't studied for science so much as salvaged, pried apart, inspected, even broken in places by eager archaeologists, desperate to separate him from the melted resin that glued him to his coffin. In the process, ribs vanished. bones were displaced, and his body was left in worse shape than when Carter first found it. Imagine being preserved for eternity, only to be accidentally mangled by your own discoverers. Mainstream fact. By the 1960s, X-ray machines were turned on the pharaoh. Researchers noted oddities, missing ribs, fractured bones, and a strange shape to the skull. Some declared it evidence of foul play, perhaps a murderous blow to the back of the head. Others speculated Tutankhamun had epilepsy, scoliosis, or even a clubfoot, pointing to his reliance on canes. Over 100 were found in the tomb. Quirky detail. In 2014, a British researcher discovered something startling. Tutankhamun's body had been charred after burial. A freak chemical reaction between oxygen, resin, and the desert heat caused his corpse to spontaneously ignite, leaving parts of him burned black. In other words, the boy king might be history's only case of a royal mummy barbecue. But science kept digging deeper. CT scans in 2005 revealed Tutankhamun wasn't the picture of divine strength after all. His bones showed signs of congenital defects, possibly from generations of sibling marriages within the royal family. DNA tests identified traces of malaria parasites in his body. Add to that a shattered leg, likely broken before or right at death, and you have a perfect storm: illness, infection, weakness. Scholarly debate. Did Tutankhamun die from an accident, like a fall from a chariot? His fragile body unable to heal? Or was he pushed into that accident by enemies at court? Some argue the broken leg was accidental, others that it was a clue to deliberate violence. The CT scans don't settle the case. They only deepen it. And so, Tutankhamun, once wrapped in linen for eternity, is now wrapped in mysteries. His body has become a puzzle for modern eyes, a jigsaw of fractures, burns, and missing ribs. To some, he's a tragic boy, cursed by inbreeding, malaria, and fragile bones. To others, he is still the victim of palace intrigue, murdered and then botched in burial. What he certainly is, however, is the most famous patient in history, prodded not by priests, but by X-ray machines, DNA swabs, and CT scanners, humming in the night. Tutankhamun's afterlife hasn't been silent. It's been a medical case file 3,000 years in the making, and still, the question remains, not just how he died, but why his body, unlike so many pharaohs, became the world's most famous forensic mystery. The story of Tutankhamun's death lingers like incense smoke in a temple, thick, tantalizing, but never quite forming a solid shape. 3,000 years later, scholars still argue in the flickering light of possibility. Was the boy king killed, crippled by fate, or simply claimed by an accident too mundane to fit the grandeur of his golden tomb? The murder theory has always been irresistible. The skull fracture once seen on early X-rays seemed to tell a clear tale: a blow to the head, an assassin's strike. Theories bloomed: a palace coup, a jealous general, a vizier who wanted the throne for himself. Perhaps Ankhesenamun's desperate letters to foreign kings hinted at the truth. Her husband removed in cold calculation, leaving her scrambling for survival. But more recent scans showed the fatal skull fracture might have been caused not by murder, but by Carter's rough handling with heated tools during the unwrapping. The smoking gun it seems, may have been archaeology itself. The mishap theory paints a less glamorous but equally tragic picture. CT scans revealed a shattered left leg, the bone splintered as if from a violent fall, combined with evidence of malaria parasites in his blood. Some suggest the accident left him infected, weakened, and ultimately unable to recover. Imagine a fragile young king, perhaps driving a chariot or even walking with his cane, taking a fall that proved fatal in a world without modern medicine. Death by infection might not sound worthy of a pharaoh, but in truth, it was the most common fate of the ancient world. And then, the mystery theory, the one that keeps Tutankhamun's story alive. What if the shattered leg and the strange burns on his body weren't just accidents? What if they were signs of a cover-up, a hurried embalming gone wrong, or even intentional sabotage of his burial? The rush to inter him, the missing pieces of his funeral equipment, the reused coffins. Each detail whispers of disorder, maybe even conspiracy. Mainstream fact: most Egyptologists now lean toward natural causes, disease, genetic weakness, and injury, rather than murder. But the truth is, the evidence is so tangled that no single conclusion satisfies all. Quirky detail. In 2010, DNA analysis revealed that Tutankhamun's father and mother were actually siblings. That genetic twist explains much of his frailty: scoliosis, a clubfoot, cleft palate. The pharaoh of divine blood may have been undone by the very purity that was supposed to make him godlike. Scholarly debate. Does the lack of firm evidence for murder mean we should dismiss it? Or does the absence itself hint at careful concealment? Was Tutankhamun's death a simple tragedy of biology, or the result of human ambition hidden under layers of sand and time? And so the boy king rests, wrapped not just in linen, but in endless questions. His golden mask stares serenely, but behind it lies the unsolved puzzle of his end. Murder, mishap, or mystery? Perhaps all three in some measure. What is certain is that his short reign, obscure in life, became immortal in death. His story is retold not because of what he achieved as pharaoh, but because of what he left behind. A tomb of wonders, a body of riddles, and a mystery that refuses to sleep. As you close your eyes, imagine the torchlight fading from the painted walls of his burial chamber. The treasures rest in silence, the boy king lies still, and the sands of time settle once again over Egypt. Some questions will never find answers, but maybe that's why Tutankhamun's story continues to glow like gold in the dark. And now, before you drift off to sleep, let's step back from the desert heat and the glint of gold. The tomb is sealed once more. The priests have spoken their words. The jackal-headed Anubis stands guard, and the Nile continues its eternal flow. You've walked with pharaohs, sat in palace halls, smelled the resin of the embalmers, and listened to the whispers of queens and generals. You felt the weight of a crown that was far too heavy for a boy's head, and the stillness of chambers where questions echo louder than answers. But here, in your quiet room, the mysteries of Tutankhamun soften into something else, not just a puzzle of death, but a reminder of life. Even the most powerful, the most adorned, the most divine of rulers was still fragile, still human. He laughed, he limped, he worried, he hoped. In the end, his story is less about gold and curses, and more about how we all wish to be remembered. Take a slow breath. Imagine the Nile in twilight, the water shimmering as the sun sinks into the horizon. The reeds sway, the ibis calls, and a cool breeze brushes against your cheek. The monuments rise in silhouette, silent, ancient witnesses to lives long past. And you are simply watching, peaceful, unhurried, safe. Let the weight of history settle into stillness. Let the boy king rest. And let your own thoughts drift gently into dreams, knowing that tomorrow will bring another dawn, just as it always has along the Nile. Sleep well, traveler of time. The sands are quiet now. Sweet dreams.